The janitor they all ignored until one day changed everything. At Eastwood University, life moved fast. Students rushed to the hallways with headphones in, eyes glued to their phones, minds preoccupied with exams, papers, and weekend plans. Professors came and went with briefcases and coffee cups, exchanging polite nods before ducking into lecture halls. Among all this noise and motion, there was one man who remained silent, almost invisible, the janitor. His name was Mr. Benjamin Cole. Every morning before the first class began, he was there, mop in hand, quietly sweeping the tiled corridors. And every night long after the lights dimmed, he was still there, emptying trash cans, wiping chalk dust on the whiteboards, making sure the campus was clean and ready for another day. Students barely noticed him. Some called him Old Ben the Mop Guy, behind his back, laughing when he shuffled past them with his beat-up cleaning cart. They'd nudge each other and roll their eyes if he accidentally crossed their path. They assumed he was just another blue-collar worker with little education, a man doing a job they'd never imagined for themselves. But Mr. Cole never reacted. He always nodded politely, offered a faint smile, and moved on. His work was precise, his posture humble, and his eyes, if anyone cared to look, carried the kind of calm that comes from a lifetime of knowing more than you say. No one asked about his story. No one wondered why a man who spoke with such quiet dignity had ended up pushing a mop in a university hallway. And he never offered it. Until one day, everything changed. It began like any ordinary Thursday. The morning sun spilled through the stained glass windows of the East Lecture Hall, where a group of first-year philosophy students gathered for their 8 a.m. class. Mr. Cole had just finished wiping down the windows when the classroom door swung open, and a few students filed in, chatting and laughing. One of them, a tall young man named Jeremy, made a loud joke at Mr. Cole's expense. Something about him being too old to still be working and not smart enough to do anything else. A few chuckles rippled through the room. Mr. Cole didn't flinch. He simply turned to leave, his eyes lowered. But just before he reached the door, he paused. Then he turned back. His voice was steady. "Actually," he said, "that interpretation of Kant's theory you were discussing earlier, it's not quite accurate." The room went silent. Jeremy blinked. "What?" Mr. Cole continued, slowly walking back toward the classroom. Kant didn't say that morality is about following rules for the sake of rules. He believed that true moral action comes from acting out a sense of duty grounded in reason and universal principles. It's not blind obedience. It's rational ethics. The professor, Dr. Ramirez, stood up from her desk, stunned. "Mr. Cole, how do you know that?" He gave her a small smile. "I used to teach this course. About 15 years ago. You could have heard a pin drop." Jeremy's mouth fell open. The students exchanged looks. Dr. Ramirez stepped forward, her expression a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "Wait, are you Benjamin Cole? Dr. Benjamin Cole?" He nodded. It turned out Mr. Cole wasn't just a janitor. He had once been a tenured professor of philosophy at Eastwood University, a beloved teacher known for his passionate lectures and thoughtful insights. He had published widely, been invited to speak at prestigious conferences, and mentored countless students. But when his wife, Margaret, fell gravely ill, everything changed. She was diagnosed with a rare neurological disease that required constant care. Mr. Cole resigned from his post without fanfare. He sold their home, downsized their life, and dedicated himself to caring for her full time. Over the years, with mounting bills and dwindling retirement savings, he took on small jobs. Eventually, he returned to the university, not as a professor, but as a janitor, quietly walking the halls he once lectured in, passing by students he once might have taught. He never asked for sympathy. He never told anyone. He simply worked. And he loved his wife until the very end. Back in that classroom, the truth spread like wildfire. The students who had once mocked him were now in awe. Over the following weeks, they began greeting him with respect. Some stopped him to ask questions. Others invited him to sit in on classes. He never boasted. He always redirected the praise. One afternoon, a student asked, "Why didn't you ever tell anyone who you really were?" Mr. Cole smiled his eyes distant but kind. Because it doesn't matter what people call you. What matters is who you are when no one's watching. That quote would later be printed and framed in the philosophy department's main office. Mr. Cole's story became legend at Eastwood. Not because he used to be someone important, but because he reminded everyone of what true character looks like. In a world obsessed with titles, fame, and flashy success, Benjamin Cole was a quiet reminder that dignity has nothing to do with status, that humility isn't weakness, it's strength, and that sometimes the people we overlook the most have the deepest stories to tell. So the next time you pass someone in a hallway, someone cleaning the floor, delivering your food, or holding the door, remember Mr. Cole. And maybe take a second to look up, smile, say hello, because you never know who they really are and what they've sacrificed to be where they are now. He walked away from everything for love, the untold story of Professor Cole. Before he was a janitor everyone ignored. Before he stunned a classroom by quoting Kant better than the professor. Before he became a legend whispered about in every hallway of Eastwood University. Mr. Benjamin Cole was a man at the top of his world. 2 decades ago, he stood at the front of the Grand Lecture Hall in Building C, not as a janitor pushing a mop, but as Professor Benjamin Cole, Ph.D., one of the most respected philosophers in the country. His lectures were the kind that made students forget to check their phones. He could quote Plato, Descartes, and Kierkegaard without blinking, but what made him different was the way he made philosophy feel alive. He didn't just teach theories. He asked students to wrestle with them, challenge them, and apply them to real life. He once asked a packed room of 200 undergrads, if you lost everything tomorrow, your title, your salary, your status, would you still know who you are? No one had an answer that day. 15 years later, Benjamin Cole would answer that question with his life. Back then, he lived in a modest home just outside campus with his wife, Margaret. She was everything he wasn't, bubbly, artistic, spontaneous. While Benjamin debated ethics and reason, Margaret painted watercolors, volunteered at shelters, and made up songs in the kitchen just to make him smile. They were opposites, but they fit perfectly. They never had children, not by choice, but by fate. And maybe that made their love even more sacred, more fiercely protected. They leaned on each other. They built a quiet, meaningful life. Then one evening, while folding laundry, Margaret dropped a glass. She stared at it for a long time, confused. A week later, she got lost walking home from the grocery store, 2 blocks from their house. The diagnosis came fast and cruel. Early onset frontotemporal dementia. She was only 52. It wasn't just memory loss. It was confusion, disorientation, changes in personality. The woman who used to sing to him every morning now forgot his name by nightfall. At first, Benjamin tried to balance both worlds. He still taught during the day and cared for Margaret in the evenings. He hired part-time help. He juggled appointments, medications, emotional breakdowns, and lectures on Nietzsche. He was exhausted, but determined. But one night, he came home late from a faculty meeting. The lights were off. The front door was open. He found Margaret barefoot in the middle of the street, crying, trying to remember which house was hers. That night broke something in him. Not his love, not his commitment, but his ability to pretend everything was still manageable. The next morning, he typed out a resignation letter. He declined all attempts by the university to offer sabbatical, reduced hours, or financial support. He didn't want to owe anyone. He didn't want to try to make it work. He wanted to be present, fully. And so, Professor Benjamin Cole, tenured, published, and admired, disappeared. He became Benjamin, the husband and caregiver. They sold the house and moved into a smaller apartment across the city. He cashed out savings, canceled journal subscriptions, gave away his books. Every day, he woke up and helped Margaret get dressed. He made her meals she often forgot to eat. He sat with her for hours, listening to the same questions repeated again and again. Sometimes she'd cry, and sometimes she'd laugh for no reason. And sometimes, on the good days, she remembered his name and would whisper, "You're still here." He always answered the same way. "Of course I am." The years passed quietly. The world moved on. Colleagues who once attended his lectures barely remembered his face. His name faded from academic journals. He didn't mind. He found moments of peace in the small routines, brushing Margaret's hair, watching her nap in the sun, reading aloud to her from her favorite poetry books even when she no longer understood the words. And when she passed away, gently in her sleep, on a rainy Tuesday, Benjamin sat beside her for hours, holding her hand, whispering stories from the life they had shared. He was 64, alone, and starting over. He didn't know what to do next. He had no desire to return to teaching. His world had changed too much. He had changed too much. But he missed the sound of chalk on board, the smell of old books, the energy of students debating ideas with fire in their eyes. So when he saw a job opening for a janitor at Eastwood University, he applied, not because he needed the money, but because in some way he wanted to be near the place that had once meant so much and to start a new chapter quietly on his own terms. He didn't tell them who he was. He didn't need to. He put on the uniform, picked up the mop, and began cleaning the very halls where he used to teach. And for 10 years, he walked among students who never knew his name until the day one careless comment led him to speak up. Just once. And everything changed. Benjamin Cole's past wasn't tragic. It was beautiful. It was full of purpose, love, sacrifice, and quiet strength. He didn't lose his identity when he walked away from the podium. He found it in caring for someone he loved more than anything. He lived the very philosophy he once taught, that a meaningful life isn't built on titles or prestige, but on the choices we make when no one's watching. And maybe that's the real reason his story lives on in whispers down the halls of Eastwood, the quiet sacrifice that no one noticed until it was too late. If you walk past Benjamin Cole in the halls of Eastwood University, you probably see just another janitor, older than most, a bit hunched, always calm, always quiet. He didn't wear his past like a badge. He didn't correct the students who ignored him or the faculty who gave him polite nods without ever learning his name. But hidden beneath that navy blue uniform was a life of quiet courage. Because while the world went on, chasing promotions, publishing papers, updating LinkedIn profiles, Benjamin Cole had made a decision years ago that most people wouldn't even consider. And he made it not for fame or reward or recognition, but out of something far more rare in today's world. Love. Real, raw, inconvenient love. When his wife Margaret was diagnosed with early onset dementia, Benjamin didn't hesitate. He didn't look for a way out. He didn't ask, "Why me?" or "What about my career?" He just quietly stepped down from his position as a tenured professor, a job most would fight to the death to keep, and walked away from a world where he was respected and admired. In his own words, "I didn't leave my job. I stepped into a new one as her full-time companion." He sold their house, liquidated his savings, gave up conferences, books, lectures. For most people, that kind of decision would feel like losing everything. But for Benjamin, it wasn't even a question, because while the world applauded ambition, he understood something deeper. Some of the greatest acts of love are the ones done quietly, without applause, when no one is watching. The kind that happen at 3 a.m., changing soiled sheets after a bad night. The kind that involve repeating the same sentence 15 times just to ease someone's anxiety. The kind where your spouse doesn't remember your name, but you still kiss her forehead and say, "It's okay, I'm here." There were no journal articles written about that. No awards. No promotions. Just long days, quiet rooms, and the steady unraveling of someone he loved more than life. Benjamin endured it all. He endured the loneliness, the kind that comes when the person you built your life with starts disappearing while their body is still right beside you. He endured the financial pressure, watching decades of savings vanish into medical bills, medication, and in-home care. He endured the emotional pain. Every time Margaret looked at him with blank eyes, unsure if he was her husband or a kind stranger. And through it all, he never once complained. Neighbors who lived nearby would later say they had no idea what he was going through. They'd see him taking Margaret for slow walks around the block, holding her hand gently, always smiling. They thought he had retired early. No one knew the full story because Benjamin never offered it. As one former student would later say, "It's not just what he gave up that amazes me. It's how he did it without needing anyone to know. That was the core of Benjamin Cole's sacrifice. It wasn't loud. It was humble, invisible, hidden behind closed doors and soft gestures. And maybe that's why it mattered so much. After Margaret passed away, Benjamin returned to Eastwood not to reclaim his old title, but simply to be close to the place where they once built their life together. He applied for a janitorial position. No one recognized his name on the resume. No one realized a man sweeping floors had once taught graduate-level ethics in that same building, and he never corrected them. For 10 years, he worked without fanfare. He made sure classrooms were clean, lights were off, and windows sparkled before anyone arrived. He'd often pause in room 213, where he once delivered lectures to packed rooms, and just sit in the back for a few minutes, not out of regret, but out of gratitude. You see, Benjamin never felt sorry for himself. To him, cleaning the same floors he once taught on wasn't a fall from grace. It was a full circle, a quiet honor, proof that our worth isn't defined by our job title, but by the integrity with which we live our lives. And it wasn't until a single moment, when he corrected a student's misunderstanding of Kant in front of class, that anyone began to realize who he really was. That moment went viral. Students began asking questions. Professors who had once passed him by now stopped to chat. Alumni came back to campus just to meet him, this time as listeners, not as experts. A student started a petition to name a lecture hall after him. The local news ran a segment called The Philosopher Janitor. But Benjamin didn't want the attention. He declined interviews. He never wrote a memoir. He simply kept working. Quietly. When asked by a young student why he never told people about his past, he replied, "Because it's not the past that defines me. It's the choices I make now." And that's the legacy Benjamin Cole left behind. A reminder that sometimes the greatest sacrifices aren't dramatic or heroic. They're quiet, simple, hidden. They happen when no one's looking. They're made not for recognition, but for love. So if you ever wonder what real character looks like, it doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears work boots, pushes a mop, and smiles at you with eyes that see more than you can imagine. That's Benjamin Cole, a janitor on paper, a giant in spirit, a man whose quiet sacrifice changed lives, long before anyone knew his name. One comment changed everything. The day Mr. Cole's secret was revealed. For nearly a decade, Benjamin Cole walked the quiet halls of Eastwood University as just another face in the background. He swept the floors of the philosophy department without a sound. He emptied trash bins in the lecture halls where he once delivered standing ovation-worthy lectures. He cleaned the windows that framed the very classrooms he used to command with wit and wisdom. Students passed him every day, earbuds in, eyes down, never once realizing they were brushing shoulders with a former tenured professor. And Benjamin preferred it that way. To him, anonymity wasn't a burden. It was a choice. He had lived a life of prestige before, and he had willingly stepped away from it. Not because he had to, but because he loved someone enough to let it go. After losing his wife, Margaret, Benjamin didn't feel like returning to the spotlight. Instead, he chose a broom over briefcase, the silence over the seminar. But everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon in October. It started like any other day. Benjamin had just finished wiping down the chalkboards in room 213, the same room where he once debated ethics with undergrads who are now professors themselves. He lingered for a moment, letting the familiar scent of old books and fresh chalk fill his lungs. He always paused in that room. It felt like home. As he stepped out, he heard voices from room 214 next door. A professor was lecturing on Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative, one of Benjamin's lifelong specialties. He slowed down, curious. The professor was new, young, and enthusiastic, but something caught Benjamin's ear, a misinterpretation, a key error, a claim that didn't align with Kant's original text. Benjamin froze, unsure if he should keep walking. But then, a student, maybe sophomore, maybe junior, raised her hand and asked for clarification. The professor shrugged and mumbled something about the moral calculator of Kant, clearly uncomfortable. The class looked confused. That's when Benjamin, almost instinctively, stepped into the room. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm but firm. "May I?" The professor blinked in surprise. Sure. Do you need to clean something?" Benjamin smiled softly, then turned to the whiteboard. He picked up a marker and, with the steady hand of a man who had written the same lecture dozens of times, began to explain Kant's principle with clarity, depth, and elegance. He referenced groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, quoted the original German text, and broke down the philosophical implications in a way that left the entire class silent. By the time he finished, the room had changed. The professor stared at him, stunned. The students were scribbling notes faster than ever before, and one girl near the back raised her hand and asked, "Wait, who are you?" Benjamin chuckled. "Just someone who used to love this stuff a lot." Then he picked up his cleaning cart and left, like nothing had happened. But the moment didn't end there. One of the students, a journalism major named Rachel Lynn, had recorded a short clip on her phone. She uploaded it to her Instagram story with the caption, "Our janitor just explained Kant better than my professor. What just happened?" The clip exploded. Within 48 hours, it had been shared across campus, picked up by alumni groups, and reposted on TikTok with millions of views. People started digging. Who is this janitor with a philosopher's mind and a professor's poise? Then someone found an old Eastwood University yearbook. Faculty section, Philosophy Department, Dr. Benjamin Cole, Department Chair, 2005. The internet did the rest. Old articles surfaced. Academic journals. Quotes. Archived interviews from conferences. Photos of a younger Benjamin standing on international stages, giving lectures to hundreds. The university was stunned. Professors who had ignored him were now searching their emails for any past interaction. Students were asking for book recommendations. The university press office reached out for an interview, which Benjamin politely declined. He didn't want a spotlight. He never did. But something had shifted. Suddenly, students started greeting him in the hallways. Professors invited him to faculty lounges. Alumni sent handwritten letters thanking him for his sacrifice and his humility. A graduate ethics class requested to have him as a guest speaker. He agreed, reluctantly. On the day of the guest lecture, he wore his janitor uniform. He stood in front of the class, looked around, and said, "I used to teach because I believed the world could be better if we thought a little deeper. I left because the world needed me somewhere else. And I came back not to teach, but to remember. So if you take anything from today, let it be this. You can lose your job, your title, even your name. But if you live with love and integrity, you never lose your worth." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. The university eventually offered to reinstate him as a professor. He declined. Instead, he agreed to teach one class per semester, unpaid. He called it Philosophy in Practice, How to Live a Good Life. Enrollment filled up in 3 hours, and every semester he showed up to class in his janitor uniform, not as a gimmick, but as a symbol, a reminder, a message that resonated far beyond the walls of academia. Because Benjamin Cole wasn't just teaching philosophy anymore. He was living proof of it, and all it took for the world to see that was one quiet moment of truth. He never sought success, but he redefined it for all of us. By the time the world finally noticed Mr. Benjamin Cole, he had already changed it, not by writing bestsellers, not by chasing wealth, not even by remaining in his high-status job. No, Benjamin changed the world by doing something far more radical in today's age. He chose meaning over ambition, people over prestige, and love over legacy. And in the end, he created a legacy far greater than any title could offer. After the video of Benjamin explaining Kant went viral, and his past life as a tenured professor was revealed, the Eastwood University community went through a transformation. But perhaps no one changed more than the man himself. Not because he sought recognition, but because recognition found him and revealed just how deep his impact already was. Over the next year, students lined up just to shake his hand in the halls. Professors asked to audit his free lectures. His class, Philosophy in Practice, How to Live a Good Life, became the most sought-after course on campus. Not because of flashy tech or trendy buzzwords, but because of how Benjamin made people feel. He didn't teach from a podium. He sat at eye level. He didn't use a textbook. He used his life. And what a life it had been. In one of his now famous opening lectures, Benjamin told the class, "I used to think legacy was about being remembered. I now believe it about how deeply you love the people right in front of you, especially when no one's watching." That line would end up on posters. It would be quoted in graduation speeches. But Benjamin? He still came to campus every morning at 6 a.m., mop in hand, ready to clean room 213 before his lecture began. He kept the janitor job, even after the university offered to promote him or put him on full salary. "Why would I stop?" he said with a smile. "This job reminds me that no task is beneath us, and no one is above anyone." And that was the essence of Benjamin Cole's redefinition of success. Where most of the world measured worth by resume lines, he measured it by relationships. Where others chased progress, he chased presence. Where many feared invisibility, he embraced it, knowing that the brightest lights often shine unnoticed. In spring semester of his second year back, something remarkable happened. A student named Maya, a shy philosophy major who had struggled with depression and self-worth, wrote an open letter in the campus newspaper. The headline read, "How a Janitor Saved My Life." In the letter, she recounted a day she had been sitting alone on a bench behind the library, sobbing quietly, feeling like she didn't belong anywhere. Everyone passed her by. Everyone except Mr. Cole. "He didn't ask what was wrong," she wrote. "He just sat down next to me, quiet, present. We watched the wind in the trees for a while. Then he said, 'The world is loud, but your worth isn't measured by how loud you are. It's measured by how deeply you care. I see you.'" That moment, Maya wrote, was the first time in years she felt seen. The first time she considered staying. That article rippled across campus and beyond. More students came forward with their own stories. Mr. Cole helping international students navigate tough forms. Mr. Cole buying coffee for a struggling senior during finals. Mr. Cole remembering names that no one else bothered to learn. None of it had made it to a resume, but it made it into hearts. And that, ultimately, is where Benjamin's legacy truly lived. When he passed away peacefully at the age of 78, the university held a memorial in the campus courtyard, not in a hall named after him. He had requested no building bear his name, but under the oak tree where he used to sit with his cleaning cart and watch students rushing by. Over 1,000 people came. Professors, janitors, students past and present, people who had once mocked him, people who had been saved by him. They didn't speak of his titles or his past lectures. They spoke of his quiet strength, his infinite patience, and the love he extended to people without judgment or agenda. A former dean called him the moral compass of our institution. A student simply said, "He taught me more about humanity in one semester than I've learned in my whole life." The university eventually created the Benjamin Cole Fellowship for Ethical Leadership, not for the top academic performers, but for students who demonstrate humility, compassion, and quiet courage. And in a small ceremony under that oak tree, they placed a stone bench with his favorite quote engraved. "You can lose your job, your title, even your name, but if you live with love and integrity, you never lose your worth." And there it sits, where students now pause between classes, where professors bring their coffee, where people sit in silence and remember a man who never chased success, but who redefined it forever. Benjamin never needed a statue. He didn't need a biography. He didn't even want a farewell. But what he left behind was something far more powerful than any monument. He left behind a community that learned to look deeper, to slow down, to listen, to live with love, even when no one is looking. That's the legacy of Benjamin Cole. And in a world that often confuses noise for greatness, his life whispers a truth we all need to hear. Success isn't about what you take with you. It's about what you leave behind in the hearts of others.